Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alan and hopefully I've got something interesting for you on this video. What we'll be discussing is how we turn this XPF foam or extruded polystyrene into something that is a nice gaming piece. For those of you who don't know this foam, it's typically sold as a sort of insulating foam, but it's got very high compression sort of strength. Now I can't really push that with my fingers, so it's very, very different to polystyrene. It is extremely lightweight and if handled properly is a great sort of modeller's aid. Now you can do lots of things with it. You can cut it quite easily, as I'm doing now, to create some shapes. You can even get a pair of pliers and pull the material out. But it's not difficult to actually use this. One of the best ways to deal with it is to get yourself a hot wire gun. And obviously go careful when you're using it, because that way you'll create some really nice shapes without any effort. It just sort of glides through it. So the video we're going to talk about is how we use it in terms of gaming context. Has it got any downsides? Well, my only downside really is that it is light. So what I tend to do is I tend to put little sort of weights into the actual body of the terrain piece, and I also go over the top a little bit in terms of protecting the surface. But let's get into the video and see what you think. So we commence with a simple process really of just cutting out the shapes that we've created in our XPF foam, and all I've done here is stick it onto mounting card. So this just gives us a sort of firm base to work with, and also because I need to create a coastline and have sort of a sea area, it's much easier to do that with a flat piece of card. So here in the video, I'm just using a scalpel to cut round an approximate shape that I've decided for the actual terrain piece. Again, please go careful when you're using anything sharp. And actually in one section of this video, I actually snapped the scalpel blade. So I can't recommend enough the use of sort of sensible equipment. So I tend to wear safety specs when I do it. Here I'm pointing at the actual lead weight that I've put into the actual piece itself. I haven't gone overboard, but it's just enough weight to help keep it firmly affixed to your sort of board or your terrain that you're using underneath. I've got obviously quite a sharp edge to this in terms of that being a very straight edge on the left hand side there, but that's because it's designed to sit on the edge of the board. As part of the rules system that we're using, there are a number of different scenarios, and apart from just being a terrain piece, the idea of that long piece of coastline is that it sort of serves as a beach area, and part of the missions within the sort of rule set is that we get our ships onto the beach. The idea is that you're landing supplies to a friendly force that's actually in the terrain or in the inland in terms of that sort of beach area. So again, all I've done with this second piece here that you can see me doing is I've left a little bit of an extended area for the card, and that's because we're going to need to create more of a water feature or more of a water area, because I've got that little section that I've purchased, which is a harbour area. This is just a little bit of fun. This is going to be an island, and there I'm explaining that we just need enough space for that piece to fit into. It doesn't really have any sort of purpose in the game itself, but I just thought it was a bit of fun, and it's always nice to have a narrative around any sort of terrain piece that you're creating. So yeah, the message is go careful, stick some weights in there if you want to. I find the actual mounting card is a really good way of keeping it together as a piece. You would have seen me as well use felt. Felt works really well where you've got an underlying surface that effectively gives it a bit of traction, and then that piece will not move when you are actually gaming with it, and that's really what the lead weight is all about. So yep, this is probably the longest piece of the video. Everything else from here on in is plain sailing, no pun intended. So phase 2 is to fix this little harbour model in place. I think it's probably designed for a later period, but to be quite honest, the buildings are so small that really, I don't think that's a major concern, and certainly you paint them like Mediterranean buildings, you're going to get away with it every time. I want to kind of sit it about there, so I'm going to just use a pencil to roughly mark the edge. And the only sort of consideration I've got really is that we're cutting into this quite a bit to actually fit it, but we'll use the bigger knife. And what I want to do is obviously cut through the foam and not go through the card base. And I'm going to use just a tool to try and pull that away. There we go. Move it out of the way. And obviously a pair of pliers or something like that would really help here. I'm just able to pull that away with my fingers. Okay, and let's just see what that looks like in there. That's quite a snug, nice fit actually. And we can put some of this back in that section, just as a bit of rock behind there. Yeah. I might even consider some steps going up the side here like this, which are very easy to kind of push in at this stage. Maybe make that look a little bit more like a path, which we can bring out a bit later in the process. Okay. All right. Okay. So I've already roughed up the base here, and I found that for most of my gluing, you can buy specialist glues, which I haven't tried that one, but I've certainly used this one, and it's worked really well. But also, just a good old standard super glue will actually glue quite happily. Get this out of the way. So I'm going to put a little bit on both the foam and the actual metal model itself. Trying to keep that off my fingers for a change. I'll sit that in there. So if you're going to use super glue, that will take a little bit more time to dry, but you'll find that that's just as strong as anything else. These bits here that I put the lead over, I've got a few offcuts here from when I did the original excuse me, hot gun and hot gluing, and I'm probably going to just stick some of those in various places just to form the basis for a cover, but also a little bit of, yeah, that's actually a better way of doing it, I think. Sorry, a little bit of a base there to actually make it less flat. So again, what I might do with this one is try a bit of the foam glue itself. Oops. And make sure we got plenty of that spread out on the card. And we're going to go back round afterwards with a bit of filler, which I'll obviously show you a bit later. That's fine. I've got something which is a bit more, okay, actually quite like, I'm trying to get something a little bit more, okay. I've got in mind that I want a sort of village area on here. So I don't want to make the mountain too dominating or the hill too dominating, but I think I'm going to do that and actually create a more sloped effect. So again, plenty of glue on here, but I'm going to this time make sure that we weight it down. Yeah, so we'll use something heavy that comes to hand. I'll leave that drying shortly and let you know what it looks like. Okay, so what we're doing here is simply taking some filler and trying to create a nice finish on the surface so that we get a smoother end result, but also one where you don't see such dramatic joins, if you like, between the pieces that I've stuck on. Now this front piece here, it's particularly important because it's going to build our beach area. So we want a nice gradual progression from the flat card up to the sort of inland area. And this is just one of the different types of filler that's available. There's plenty to choose from. So as you can see here, this is the sort of principle that we're going for, with all of the sort of main areas filled in with foam. Filler. You can actually smooth it around with your finger, which I'm doing now, just to get a nicer sort of more natural finish. But the idea is there that we're creating raised areas, more natural looking areas, where we don't see these harsh joins between these sort of higher areas that I've placed onto the terrain. So once the filler is dry, what we're going to do is just simply take a piece of sandpaper, get rid of the rough edges, try and get a smooth finish, and it really doesn't take too long, as you can see, before we're getting a really nice smooth effect. And this is a simple 150 grit piece of sandpaper, which is certainly fine enough for the sort of terrain that we're doing. And the filler responds to this really well. And I think you can see that's quite a different sort of end result now, with just a few seconds or a couple of minutes of sanding. So I'm going to carry on doing the rest of it and show you what it's like when it's finished. Okay, so as you can see, I've now finished sanding off, got a nice smooth finish. Just a word of warning, you will get plenty of dust around. So the next stage for me is to brush this off, just to get rid of all of the loose material, and then we'll look at sealing and painting. Okay, so this has now been nicely smoothed off. So I thought I'd show you the sort of materials and, if you like, the ingredients that I'm going to have at my disposal for the next phase. So in no particular order, I've got a couple of tins, a couple of pots of paint here, or however you want to call it, a tube of paint in this particular case, and a bottle of paint here. And I'm going to mix these two colours. I'm going to try and go for quite a light sandy colour on here. And as we'll see a bit later, I've got the option of darkening it up if I need to. But actually, obviously, the terrain, having looked at a few pictures, was fairly light, or is fairly light in the Mediterranean. I've got a mixing pot just to put some ingredients in, which I'll show a bit later on. I've got some ordinary PVA glue. I've also got some Mod Podge, and I'm going to use both of these together to just give a little bit of solidity to the finished model. And I've got some basing sand, and this, given the scale, is a very fine basing sand. So basically the next stage is to start mixing up in the pot. One last thing, I've also got myself a very old brush. This is probably too big, to be honest, but it was the first thing I found in the garage. But it's quite a soft brush. You don't want to be doing anything, that sort of jabs in too much. So really the first phase is to start having a look at the paint in the pot, and I don't know if you can see that, but it's quite a tan colour actually. Let's get the other paint ready. Now I'm simply going through the process of mixing the paint with the Mod Podge and with our PVA. The idea of the Mod Podge and PVA is that we want a strong surface layer for this terrain piece. It's going to get handled during the game. It's going to need to be a bit more durable and robust than just the foam itself. As you saw earlier, you can sort of dig into the foam, you can pick it out and cut it, and really putting the protection on with the paint and effectively that sort of glue and protective layer gives us a really strong surface that will stand the test of time. Once you've got the paint to the stage that you think is appropriate and good to go, what we're going to then do is simply obviously apply to the model. One bit of a tip for you is here I'm using a very soft brush. We don't want to sort of jab into the model at this stage, because obviously it's still in its sort of raw foam sort of state, but just make sure you get good coverage. You can obviously do a couple of coats of this. In this video, just for speed, I'm only doing one initially, but as you'll see, my plans change. Okay, so whilst that's still wet, I'm going to take, as I say, some fine sand. This happens to be some Colour Forge fine sand. Plenty of manufacturers or providers for this, but you probably can't necessarily see, but that's a very thin sandy base, and all I'm going to do is start spreading this loosely around the surface of the model. And I'm not going to go too far down the beach, if that makes sense, because I think in this sort of scale, trying to make this look like sand is probably going to look a bit silly. Just to reiterate, these are for 1 and 2 250 scale triremes, principally, or ships of that sort of ilk. So we don't want to go too bulky here. So we're just going to get the model, or the feature, I shouldn't really call it a model, the feature to a sort of certain stage that I'm happy with in terms of coverage. I'm not going to worry too much about the edges, because we're going to come back and paint those with more of a stone effect. So maybe just a little thin layer there to give us a bit of coverage. This section here is going to be a little bit bluey, given that it's obviously supposed to be representing the shoreline. So I'm just going to move that off camera onto another piece of paper to dry, and repeat for the next model. So simply repeat the process here of putting some sand on. There's going to be a nice little feature on here as well, and perhaps I'll keep that as a little bit of a surprise for later on in the video. But the same sort of principle applies. The edges will be more rocky, and the surface will get, or the top layer will get some grassy flock on, just to sort of loosen up a bit. Just a little bit around this sort of edge here, up the sides, and that's plenty. One of the things I would recommend is, if you can get yourself a pot with a good lid, this will stay usable for a few days, particularly if you want to wash it down, as this is acrylic paint. What I might do is, some of the areas that don't look quite so covered, or maybe are a bit thin, we can go back and at least we know we've got the same colour. So now we just let that dry. Once it's dry, we're just going to shake off the excess sand and return that to the pot. We're just looking to have good coverage so that we've got something for our later work to be based on in terms of coloration and coverage. As you can probably tell, I'm not particularly enamoured with this colour. What I've done is I've gone round and really had a good heavy brush of the sand to get rid of it. And now I'm going to revisit the colour. That's the original still left in the pot. I've got some black, which is just another surface primer, and I've got some chocolate brown. Again, I don't think that's particularly chocolatey. I think that's continuing the whole tan theme. But we're going to give it a go, mix it up, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, with the combination of the chocolate brown, the black, and the original, I've now got a much better colour to base this on. I'm just going to use this as a bit of an undercoat, a sealing coat. I've added some more Mod Podge and some more PVA, and that's going to be a much better colour to put the sand on and then perhaps dry brush over. I'm just going to give that a whirl now. You can see what you think. Yeah, already I'm happy with that. So I'm going to run round as before, not worrying too much about necessarily this sort of beach area here, because we want that to be a bit sandy, and I've got some proper, oh excuse me, sand coloured paint for that. But we'll have a little look at what this turns out to be like when it's on all of the pieces, and obviously I'll show you guys what that looks like. So there we go, and it's the same process with our fine sand over the top, just trying to create a bit of texture on the surface. And again, I'm not worrying too much about the cliff side of things, and I'm not worrying about how evenly I'm doing this. I might shake it around a little bit in a mo, but I think in terms of what I'm looking for, this is much closer to what I wanted. Give it a bit of a sweep, shake around, and put that to one side, and we'll do the next one. And here's the same effect on the other piece that we've been working on. Same sort of thing, a little bit more sand over the top and off to the sides. You can probably get, I don't know, something like a flower shaker type of arrangement to get a better coverage here, but I'm going to be quite pleased, I think, with the overall effect once it's done. Bit of a spoiler alert, I've got some tiny buildings and some trees to actually create a little bit of texture, so I want some of the original paint left over so that I can blend that in. But we'll let that dry and we'll take a look. So here we are, it's about 24 hours later. Let's see what we've got now. Shake off the excess, give it a bit of a brush. You can see obviously even more comes off, which is great. Tip that down there. Now, it may not be immediately obvious on the video, but we've actually got quite a nice textured surface here, which I'll be able to dry brush. We've also got a little bit of lightness coming through from that earlier colour here, so we've got a nice sand effect on the beach. So a couple of things to do now. I'm going to try putting more of a sand colour on the actual front here to create the sort of coastline or the waterline. And then we'll have a little look at putting on some of the buildings that I've painted and creating a bit more of a scene, and then perhaps dry brushing around it. I'm also going to put some greenery on, but again we'll have a look at how that goes once we've started to construct the rest of the village. Before we move on, let's do the same to the second piece. And again, I don't know if you're catching that on the camera, but again slightly lighter on the top. Got some good finish there really, or some good texture there as part of the finish. I'm using just the same old brush that I used to put the paint on with, just to make sure we get all of the loose material off. I don't really want any of that getting in the way later on. And that's great. And obviously quite a bit of sand can be returned to the pot. Okay, so I'm going to try and paint this sandy beach area with what is described as a beige. I mean, it's a very light beige in my opinion, but we'll give it a shake. I've shaken it a bit more than that off camera. You can see that it's quite actually it's quite a good tonal colour for this one, so we might actually use it as a dry brush for this centre section a bit later on. But what I want to do is just get a bit of a sort of loose covering going on where I'm actually getting into the sandy areas. What I'm going to then do is go over this with a bit of a highlight to try and get a lighter colour going on. But I'm just trying to break up that distinct edge that I've managed to create. I don't mind some of these sort of almost orangey brown shining through in certain areas, because that will just help to give it a more realistic mixed colour rather than a single tone, as it were. So I'm going to carry on doing that, and I'm going to do the other piece and let you know what it looks like. Okay, so here's the finished effect. What I've done is done a little bit of dry brushing over here just to try and lift that edge a little bit. I'm not too worried by that stark contrast at the moment. We're going to use a lighter colour shortly to highlight this top section here and just make it look a little bit more sandy. Also, where the logical edge of the water is, we're going to put some blue tone down, and that will blend in with the tabletop. Next stage though for me, I think, is to try and position some of the buildings that we've got and trees. And just to give you a bit of a heads up, these are 10mm buildings that I've just painted up very, very simply with a sort of whitey cream colour there and a typical red tile for a Mediterranean feel. And I've got some little trees here which I think are irregular. I'll try and put some links in about where these bits and pieces came from once I can remember where they were. But the idea is we're going to take some of these buildings, I will clear the bottoms off properly, and we're going to sit them onto a little area to make a little village sort of area, and then I'll dry brush around them to create a bit of a road network by leaving the dark colour underneath. So I'll have a little play with that and then show you how that pans out. Okay, so what I've done is simply to put some black undercoat around this section here that we're going to make more of a harbour area. While this is drying, just a couple of things to point out. Obviously the tree bases that I put on are too light in colour. I did them before obviously finalising the colour on the board, but that's great because over this side we've got our original colour mix, and then I can go over those edges and blend those in. A little bit of sand will really take those away. I could have dug them into the surface, but to be honest, time prevents me from doing that. But what I'm going to do now is take a look at these rocky side areas, and I've got a bit of a unusual paint here. It's a furniture paint, but it's a grey oak, and I think that will make a great contrast for that browny side. And bear in mind, this isn't going to be brown after we've finished, but I think, ooh, you probably can't see that off camera, but that's not stirred very well at all. So we'll give this a good old mixing. I've actually got a film across the top of the paint, but that's fine. But we've got a colour like this, which may not scream sort of rock to you, but rocks are very rarely grey, and this sort of grey-brown that we've got, I think it was labelled up as a grey oak, I think is going to be perfect as a sort of contrast colour. So everything's still a little bit wet because I'm going for speed here, but if we get a little small amount on the brush, almost like a dry brush, and then start to create the edging effect. I quite like the fact that it's not sinking into all of the areas and just catching some of the bits that are a little bit proud of the surface. But I don't know if you can see that sort of effect that we're getting now. I'm going to carry on doing that all around the edge and then give you a better look. Okay. What I'm trying to do here is just give the feeling that the bottom section is more complete. You know, almost like I'm imagining that being the rocky coastline there. So obviously from a distance, what I'm trying to do is get more consistent colouring on the bottom and sort of lighten at the top. And as you can see, I've not, like here, I've just gone very faint over the outline, just really to try and capture the fact that it's a little bit grayer, but also to try and focus in on making this appear to be the rocky section at the bottom of the cliff almost, or the bottom of the rise, as it were. So that's the effect. I mean, obviously, it's a personal thing, but I think just the way that that's feeling from painting it, and the way that it's going to look. And as I said, don't lose sight of the fact this is going to become a lot lighter, a lot greener, and I want to keep some of that dark tone underneath. So with every little sort of stage that we're adding, I think we're adding a little bit more realism. The most important bit is the blue line. We're going to come back to that. So what I'm going to do now is start putting some greenery on, and I'm just going to put this on with a little bit of ordinary PVA. I'm going to use our paintbrush though, just to get a little bit of softer finish, as it were. So I'm just going to squeeze some in there. And this is a bit of an experiment first, so I'm going to put some around here to see what we think. Just a little bit off camera, so I'll put some down here as well. I still haven't gone and blended these in yet, so actually what I might do is do a little bit of this just as a trial, and then have a look at blending the brown in first. This is a mixed flock, and I don't want to go too light here. I'm just going to test that out. To be honest, I think that's too light, so I'm going to revisit that. But I think the first thing I'm going to do, as I said earlier, is blend the base of the trees in with our original mixture, which is actually underneath here, helping me keep this off the surface. So let's just have a little look at this, see how usable it is. We might need a little bit of our sand as well. I'm just going to wipe the PVA off this paint brush. Okay, as you can see, hopefully anyway, let's bring this a little bit nearer to the camera. We've got some green flock that is, in my opinion, too green, so we'll revisit that later. But this this paint mixture is actually doing quite a good job of toning in the bases of these trees. In a moment I'm going to put a little bit of sand around them, just see what I think in terms of the overall effect. As I said, if time permitted, I would probably sink these into the actual foam itself, the XPF foam, extruded polystyrene, sorry. But I think for the time being, just making sure that you guys can actually see that, we're just gonna, so if I just do that for a moment and locate what I've done with the sand, which is just slightly off camera. Oops. And again, just a little bit of a going over the top. This time I want to make sure that we actually get it around the actual base of the trees though. So I'm going to move it around a bit like that. And hopefully when that dries, that will really blend it in. So I'm going to carry on getting these other tree bits blended in first, and then we'll have a little look and see what you guys think. Okay, so while I'm waiting for this to dry off enough to see what we're doing. I'm going to take the original beige, stick some of that into a mixing tub, and then I'm going to take a scoop of our original brown colour and mix it in. Now I've probably put too much brown in there, but what I'm trying to do is create a mixture that I will use to dry brush over the surface. And what I've decided to do, because my flock experiment went pretty badly, I'm going to get some greener paint and almost dry brushed some green over it to give me some greener areas, if that makes any sense. But that's the sort of colour I've ended up with, just as a first attempt anyway. And we'll have a little look at that on the surface using the same brush. Oh, sorry, I've gone off camera again. All I've been doing is taking a little bit on the wood so that the brush is coated but not too wet, if that makes any sense. And I'm just going very, very carefully to see what I think at the moment in terms of lightening up the surface. That is working, and it's probably about the right sort of colour. I just think the brush I've got is not a dry brush. Really, I should have a flatter, wider brush here. I'm just at a workshop rather than my painting desk, which is why we've got this sort of effect going on. But you know what, I'm going to persevere with this because it's what I've got available, and I think once I've got enough of that around, we might end up with a good base effect. I'm not sure you can see that quite as well as I can, but I don't know if you can see that we're getting some colour differentiation there between the underlying surface, and I'm trying desperately not to streak it, but obviously if I put too much on we do get a bit of streaking, so I'm going to have to work that in. But I'm just trying to create a bit of depth in terms of the finish, and if I've got areas that I'm particularly unhappy with, I can hit those with a bit of sand or a bit of flock just to try and make it look less artificial. But I'm going to run around the surface doing this and then worry about greening up some of the surface afterwards. Just going to put that to one side, because one of the things I want to do is make sure that in these sort of areas where I'm coming on getting a road effect, what I actually want to do is bring, I think I need to get some more paint, is bring the lightning around the front of these buildings so that we create almost like a road effect. I don't know if you can see that, but all I've done is literally sort of go into the buildings, because what I want to do is leave a darker area just to give a very subtle impression of there being a road there. And I can already see that I've missed a tree there, but we'll carry on doing that. And I want to take this lightness down to towards the shoreline, obviously. And I don't mind mixing in a little bit of sand, that's fine. We're just going to get some extra texture on that. What is important is to try and get between the houses, so that it looks part of a natural finish there. As I said, just a rough, subtle impression of a road is all I'm after at this stage. So I'll carry on doing that. Make sure I get that one covered as well with sand, and see you shortly. You join me in the final stages of this dry brushing attempt. I've actually managed to find myself a slightly larger brush, which has both helped and caused more problems at the same time. You can see that I've got now a bit more coverage on the board, which is something I'm happy with. But there's a few areas where I've just caught too much paint really, because it's harder with a silly size brush like this to actually do the job properly. I've still got the original one that I had, which I'm going to try and blend in a little bit more. I'm not unhappy with the sort of effect, if you like, because obviously towards the coast you're going to get this lightening of the soil and general sort of dustiness, for want of a better phrase. So again, I'm not too unhappy, but what I think I am going to do is, when I obviously get a better grass colour for this surface, just make sure that we try and blend that in a little bit more. Done this guy over here. For some reason this one's picked up quite a bit in front of the castle. Again, not too unhappy with that. Just for the purposes of blending it in, I want to make sure that we get something in the castle so that it looks like it belongs to the terrain, and make sure we get up to the walls. So, you know, the concept behind this was that we've got a harbour that's servicing the castle as a bit of a fortification. Just a little bit of narrative or a little bit of fun in terms of the overall game. Won't have any effect on it at all. As you can see, what I've done is I painted that grey with the same, which is a slightly darker version of the grey that we had before. Now I'm going to leave that because now I'm going to try and tackle this difficult subject of getting a blue effect on the side. So we'll come back and we'll have a little look at that. Okay, let's go with the difficult thing that we've got to do here. So this is a Master Series, or Reaper paints I believe they are. This is actually a 918-8. I quite like these paints because they come in triads. This is part of the Ultramarines Blue triad, and I've got options here to either lighten or darken, but I'm going to go with a mid-tone to begin with. What we're trying to do is create a washy, wishy-washy blue effect over the surface edge here on the coastline. What I'm going to do afterwards, as I've said before, is use some liquid water resin to actually give us the depth. But what I want to do is put the coloration underneath. So I've just popped a little bit of water into the mixing pot here, and we'll give this a minor squirt. I'm not sure, to be honest, how much of this I actually want to be, you know, how much of a colour I want this to be really. But as you can see, that's very watery, although very blue. So let me just try what I think that might look like as an effect. Thankfully, as you can see, that is starting to soak in and lighten up as it goes. And all I want to do really is catch the edge like that. And it just needs to be blue enough that it's going to blend it in with the board, or in my case I use a sort of cloth, which we'll have a look at when the terrain's done. And as you can see there, it's very watery, but that's probably a good thing. No pun intended, as it were. And we want to get slight irregularity, but nothing too dramatic, not with the scale that we're at anyway. Okay. So I think for that one, just to move that away there, I'm just going to check what that edge bit looks like there. Okay, so I'm going to leave that just like that for a moment, and I'm going to swap over for our slightly more awkward piece, because this second piece is going to need some more attention because of the amount of water we're going to end up with. So here I want to create the impression that this is almost like the harbour area, so I'm going to come across more of this sort of area, possibly even up to there, so that, yeah, that sort of coverage I think is what I'm after, because then it creates this view that the blue is the sea has come in, and that's why we've got that blue. For some reason this seems quite a lot lighter on this piece, but never mind. We'll create a little bit of a blue effect up there actually, so that it looks like the water is actually going over the sort of harbour area. Now, for your taste and mine, that might be a little too blue when I see it en masse like that. So this is where having the triads comes in useful, because I'm gonna just chuck into the mix the darker shade in the triad and see if that gives me a slightly better finish. It has darkened it, and perhaps we should just concentrate on the edge. So again, the sea obviously darkens as it gets deeper, so maybe I won't revisit that initial colour here, and we'll just concentrate on making this a little bit darker, and perhaps just do a little bit more with the dark shade of the triad. And that is really quite dark when you actually put it out neat, as it were. Whoa! And that is something I didn't want to do, and that's just flick some paint randomly onto the surface. So we will definitely sort that out quickly. Fortunately, I've still got quite a lot of my paint pots are reasonably active, as it were. And let's get, that's my fault for not cleaning the brush off actually. Let's get a piece of tissue, get those sections off there, make those a bit drier. Okay, now I'm just going to wash the brush and deal with that. Okay. You know, to be honest, I like people to see the fact that, you know, mistakes happen, and most importantly, mistakes can be dealt with. Okay. That's fine. So let that sort of effect dry now, and then we'll come back and put some liquid water on. Okay, so I'm going to treat this stuff a little bit more like paint. So what I'm going to do, as I said, is basically squirt some on. There's no mixing with this particular brand, although some of them you will have to mix. I'm going to spray it, pour some on effectively, move it around with the paintbrush to try and get to these edges. And the one thing I'm going to go careful about is making sure that if I need to, I can raise the rear section just to keep it from running onto the sand. I hope that makes a bit of sense. As I say, not recommended, but let's give it a go and see what the properties of this liquid are. And maybe, okay, there we are. We're starting to get some out now. To be honest, it feels a bit more like a glue. than a paint, which perhaps, given what I'm trying to do, is a good thing. Just be warned, although this says it's non-toxic, it does tell you to watch your eyes and to keep away from your skin if you can. So that's probably enough for me to just get my brush and see if we can mix that around a bit. And obviously what I want to try and do is get a glossy sea-like finish. I may, you know, once I actually get a bit more time, I'd be quite happy to come back and try and create some wave effects here. But this is quite sticky on the paintbrush. I have a feeling that this might be the end of a good brush, but never mind. Because it's quite sticky, I'm not as concerned as I was about running over onto the sand. Just want to make sure that we get that sort of covered, like up to the edge, without going too far over the edge. Okay, now you're probably, like me, wondering if that's had any effect whatsoever, but I think, you know, given where we are in the process and the amount of time I've got, that's possibly a good thing, because we've certainly got some depth here. Yeah. Okay, not sure how that's coming over on the camera. Let's have a quick look. But as I said, there is a bit of depth there, and the nice thing is we've got a bit of tonal sort of difference in terms of that sea surface effect. So really not unhappy with that at all as a start for 10. So I'll do the same to the other board, dry, perhaps using a hairdryer, and see where we go. So that's the same process completed for this very narrow strip of water on the edge here. Obviously we've got some thinking to do about waves, etc., but I think possibly just paint those on when we get closer to this being dry. So I'm just going to get back to the trusty hairdryer, give this a whirl, keep an eye on the actual overall finish to make sure it doesn't bleed into the sand, and then I think we're on to the final stages of getting some extra flock on, etc. But join me shortly. So here are the gaming pieces actually on the gaming mat. I'm quite pleased overall with the the colour that I've got, but I do think I need to make this a bit greener. I probably need to do a little bit more blending in with the sort of coloration here in terms of the mat that I've got, but in general terms that's going to work just fine. I'll give you a bit of a panned out shot in a moment, but what we're going to try and do for a little minute is have a little experiment with dry brushing some green in certain areas, and then also dry brushing some lighter colours. So let's get that started and I'll join you in a moment. What I'm going to try first is a little bit of Vallejo olive green, camouflage olive green. I found a much more suitable brush. This is still quite a stiff brush, which I'm slightly nervous about. But what I want to do is load it up, but obviously get quite a bit of the paint off, and then just sort of brush around some of these areas here. I thought I'd go for the areas that were around the housing and sort of wooded areas. These other little bits that I've put on here, by the way, are just some Jarvis scenics, and basically you can tear off the amount that you think is right. So obviously you can use it for all sorts of different scales, because you just tear off bigger pieces for the larger scale models. And let's give it now let's have a little look at this in the light. Now that's quite subtle, and I'm actually quite pleased with that, because what I'm going to be doing in the other areas is, as I say, trying to lighten some of them a little bit and just break up the sort of brownness of the surface. So I'm going to carry on doing that for a little bit and then show you what I think. Sorry, I'll show you and let you know what you think. So to be honest, what I've done is I've morphed into more of a stippling effect, just to try and sort of almost combine a dry brush and a as I say, a sort of pressing or stippling effect. And I'm actually quite liking the fact that that's creating some nice subtle areas of green. So yeah, I'm very pleased with this sort of overall finish now. Bear in mind that the sort of scale that we're talking about, I don't think flock was necessarily the right choice here. So I've put a little bit of paint over the rough areas that I did try and put flock on, but I'm just going to add a little bit more paint to that top section. Sorry, let's move this down. And then I'm going to switch to, and obviously you don't have to worry too much about what you're doing, because you're only putting very light amounts on, and I want to get into some of that in there. And you know, I spoke about creating some sort of entrance road effect. It's becoming more pronounced, obviously, with the application of this green area. But yeah, hopefully I'm not in your way when I'm doing this. And I'm going to get a little bit in there, and then I'm going to call it with that green, I think, because I think it works best being closer to the trees. It makes more sense, I suppose, to have the green coexist near those sort of wooded areas. And now I'm going to try a similar sort of approach, but with a much lighter sander colour. Back in a mo. Right, so I'm going to try a similar approach with this mid coat from the Bacchus basin system. It's just a sort of sandy colour, as you can see. The brush that I've got is the same one that I used just a moment ago. It's obviously got a little, well, I've obviously tried to clean it and dry it, because obviously we should have this as dry as possible. I'm going to grab a little cocktail stick to get this started, as in just to give this a bit of a stir. This is not too thick, but I find this sort of Bacchus system very helpful, to be honest. It may not be quite light enough, but we'll just see how we get on. This is the mid section, if you like, or the mid coat. And now this is much more of a dry brush. I don't know if you can get the effect there, but we are definitely lightening the surface and making it look a little bit browner. Sorry, taking away some of that brown finish. So I'm going to concentrate on areas near to the shoreline, in the first instance. That's better. I don't want to lose too much of the other effect though. Okay. And again, the thing with dry brushing is, oops, let's bring that over so you can see what I'm doing. You obviously want to try and keep the effect subtle. And yeah, I've got a really nice mix there actually of the blue, then it goes into a proper sand, then we've got some rocky sort of coloration there, and now we're putting some of this lighter tone on, and I really quite like that. I think this is a real personal choice thing, really. You know, once you're once you're happy, that's fine. And again, I'm not trying to recreate any specific terrain feature as part of the game, and this is all for the Who Needs Sails game, which is about triremes and warships before, well, when they relied on oar power basically. So this is sort of trying to be a Mediterranean style piece that allows us a little bit more interest in terms of fighting across the various objectives for the game, one of which is to get your ships beached, hence this sort of coastline effect here that we've created. And there is a tendency to do way too much in terms of dry brushing, but on that piece, let's see if we can get a little bit of a contrast going here, so you can see tonally what we've done, and I'm actually very happy with that. So I'm going to put this one to one side, repeat the process on this one, and then I'll show you what it looks in situ. And there we go, really. There's the sort of overall effect that I was looking for. We've got a nice sort of green areas to accentuate the sort of woodland effect. We've got a little bit of light sand on top in terms of that dryness, and then we've got a really nice woodland sort of rocky effect, I think. I've just got these houses to do and then I'm done. But I thought I might just lift the camera up and you can take a look at what the terrain looks like on the board, as it were. So excuse my mess there, got a little bit of ridging, but there you go. Don't know if I can zoom in easily on this one, but we'll try. But you can see on a baseboard that's going to make a really nice sort of feature. So yeah, a little bit more I think to do in terms of games, and we'll show you some of the feedback from or the gameplay from Who Needs Sails. But thanks for joining me. See you again soon. Just as a final shot for the video, I just thought I'd show you the effect having painted the housing. I could possibly do a little bit more with this sculpted area, but in terms of using for the game, this is perfectly acceptable and is ideal for what I'm after, really. As always, any questions, please let me know. And if you like the sort of stuff I do, tell me what you'd like to see. And obviously, hope to see you soon. Take care.